Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about how Nintendo Switch 2 graphics continue to get better and better. So as many of you may already understand, typically for pretty much any hardware generation, as we get deeper into that generation, developers continue to figure out more and more ways to take better advantage of the hardware. And with Switch 2 in particular, the conversation is a bit more interesting because it's not only just taking better advantage of the hardware, but how developers are taking better advantage of NVIDIA's DLSS, and that's continually being improved upon as well. And so we are continuing to see improvements with different Switch 2 games here. We are seeing improvements in performance for a newer build in Elden Ring running on Switch 2. We are seeing Resident Evil Requiem continue to improve now it's already out on the market. Capcom has released an update on Switch 2 where the game is looking better. And Nintendo even recently put out a huge update, a graphical boosting mode for Switch 1 games in handheld mode. You can test this out yourself for a variety of your Switch 1 games you play on your Switch 2 in handheld mode. There are some significant improvements here and some pretty cool stuff. So we're going to be going over all these improvements and diving even deeper into this overall conversation, including a little bit of that controversy about DLSS 5.0. What's going on with that? So we have a decent amount to get into today. But here's the typical reminder. If you find yourself enjoying my videos and you haven't subscribed already, please do. It would make for a huge difference. But you want to know what else has made a huge difference? The extra time taken to improve Elden Ring Tarnished Edition, the Switch 2 version of Elden Ring. So here are some positive things being said by different sites when playing Elden Ring, the latest build at GDC. From RPG site, our session was quite short, but to make the most of it, I bum rushed the tutorial to the Margit boss in order to get the best representation of the game's performance across the open world, while deliberately stretching things to the limits with active NPCs and constant loading. Even once it started raining, the game hit the 30 FPS target consistently, and resolution similarly remained much the same. We also got to check out the game in docked mode, using the new lighter night type class added to this version of Elden Ring. The demo we played looked to emphasize quality over performance, settling in with a 30 FPS frame rate at a high resolution. So my take on this is, one, I love to see that we are seeing improvements to performance in Elden Ring here. Personally, I don't need every single game to run at 60 frames per second. For most open world games, having a higher frame rate is a bit of a challenge here, and on Switch 2, when we're talking about more ambitious AAA titles, if we can even get an open world game running well on Switch 2 at 30 FPS, I would say that's a pretty big win. And typically with From Software titles, performance is kind of shaky, so it's promising to see that we're hearing about some significant improvements here. And if the game is holding up at a high resolution, that also sounds pretty good too. But this is what GameSpot had to say about their experience. After several months of performance adjustment, the game has re-emerged at GDC 2026, and so far it looks to be in a much better shape. One telling sign here is that Bandai Namco has enough confidence to allow Switch 2 handheld gameplay to be recorded, albeit from an over-the-shoulder perspective. The demo can also be experienced in docked mode, and overall, it looks like the game has been well optimized. Even with several graphical concessions, Limgrave still looks great, and it looks like the frame rate hovers around the 30 to 40 FPS range. So it seems that most people who have gotten to experience the latest build of Elden Ring feel pretty good about it. And myself personally, after enjoying Resident Evil Requiem, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Cyberpunk on my Switch 2, all of which are pretty impressive games on the console, I found all of the experiences to be highly playable, immersive experiences. I really enjoyed the games on the platform. And what we're hearing about here for Elden Ring, I'm starting to get similar vibes here. I've already played Elden Ring on my PlayStation 5, I played through the game in its entirety, but the sense I'm getting here is that if you haven't played through it yet, or you want to pick it up again to enjoy it on your Switch 2 in handheld mode with the new content, then it seems like it's going to be worth it. Hopefully, we get a release date soon, and this also comes alongside some news on the Duskbloods, which, by the way, some people might be looking at Elden Ring to get some sort of idea of how the Duskbloods is going to run on Switch 2, but let's remind ourselves, Elden Ring was not developed with Switch 2 in mind. The Duskbloods is a Switch 2 exclusive, so they should probably be running fairly different, but we'll see once we actually start getting some real news on this game. But circling back to Resident Evil here, I'm actually pretty happy this update came out before I finished the game, so I could still enjoy some of the improvements before getting to the end. Of course, I already jumped into my second playthrough because it's such a good game. But there was an update to Resident Evil Requiem, and we've seen some comparisons here, and there is a noticeable difference. We're not entirely sure how much has actually changed here, but some things are clear. Things do look touched up a bit here. So take a look at the screenshot here of Leon. This is from before the update. Now look at after the update. If you look at the hair, like look around Leon's head, you'll notice that it's a lot more smoothed out now. It looks significantly better. How hair looks in Resident Evil and just different Switch 2 ports in general from all these big AAA games has been a common talking point, and in many cases I have felt like the hair has kind of looked a little bit jarring. It would take away from your immersion, but I played through Requiem before the update and I was ultimately kind of okay with it. But now after the update, they've made some improvements here. It does look better. And the game just came out. There may be updates in the future where it'll look even better. I wouldn't be surprised if they have another improvement that they get in there before the DLC comes out, when there's that second wave of people giving the game a try. And by the way, it's not just hair that was improved. You'll notice here that the screenshot in the newer build is brighter. There are details that are more apparent here. And this is a common thing we see with a lot of big games that have come out on Switch 2. They come out and then just a little bit later we see continued improvements. And we are still really early on into the life cycle for Switch 2. Developers are going to continue to find more ways to push the hardware, optimize, and make things look better and better, like how hair presents itself in these big AAA titles ported over to the console. But there's something really cool that just happened within the last few hours here. Nintendo put out a new update for Nintendo Switch 2 that includes a variety of improvements to parental controls, airplane mode. They even added a different graphic for when you're changing out your game. But the big thing is a handheld mode boost. So basically, how this works, you go into your Switch 2 settings, you scroll all the way down to System, in System Settings, and then you scroll down until you see Nintendo Switch Software Handling, and you will see the option to turn on Handheld Mode Boost. And what this does is improve the visuals for Switch 1 titles on Switch 2. And essentially what's happening here is that the Switch 2 is running Switch 1 games in docked mode, even though you're playing in handheld mode. So just like Switch 2, Switch 1 had two different modes, handheld mode and docked mode. When in docked mode, the consoles are plugged into an external power source, so they don't have to be concerned about power consumption, so the console runs at a higher clock speed, so they can output overall better visuals. So in handheld mode, the console is capable of less. But now you can enjoy the very best visual options of Switch 1 titles in handheld mode. Like I try to share some off-screen footage right here of just the start screen of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and the difference is so clear, I would say. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is one of those games where when you would switch over to handheld mode, the game would drop in resolution, it would look very grainy. It was a significant downgrade. Now, most Switch 1 titles didn't see this much of a significant downgrade, so for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it's probably going to be one of the biggest improvements here. Taking a look at some comparisons on Twitter, this is Xenoblade Chronicles 2 with the boost mode. Now, look at it, not in boost mode. Notice how everything becomes a lot dirtier, a lot more grainy. It just looks really messy. And it's far cleaner in boost mode. Here's another one. This looks fine. You switch to non-boost mode and it gets messy. So handheld mode for Xenoblade Chronicles 2 did not look good, so this boost mode here makes for a huge difference. I do have to say, because there's been a lot of conversation as of late that we might be getting an enhanced version of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in the not-so-distant future, I totally am on board with that, and I still think it would make for a huge difference. What we're seeing here is just the best version of the game on Switch 1. Even in docked mode, I think Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has a lot of room for improvement here with the texture detail, the resolution, the performance. There's still so much that can be enhanced here. The game could look a lot better, but definitely we're seeing some nice improvements with boost mode here. But it goes beyond just Xenoblade Chronicles 2. There are plenty of games that have a noticeable downgrade in handheld mode on Switch 1. Here's another comparison shared by Korosuke1201. So as you see here, on the right, this was Fire Emblem Three Houses in portable mode, and here it is in docked mode. And so when you turn on the boost, yeah, it looks a lot cleaner by comparison. It's a big difference. Or looking at this comparison from Gamers Reckoning here. So this is from Astral Chain. So here is the handheld mode. This is the boost mode. Look at the hair right here. It's kind of choppy and messy. Over here, it looks a little bit more clear. Over here, you can see a little bit more aliasing. It's cleaned up a little bit. We're not talking about massive, super giant differences here. These are all still the same games that were made for Switch 1. We're just seeing the differences of portable mode versus docked mode here, but now we can run all these Switch 1 games at max settings. Now this clip right here was shared by my Carlo Bitsman on Twitter. All of the sources will be linked in the description below. But what we're taking a look at here is The Witcher running on Switch 2, but remember, The Witcher was ported over to Switch 1, so this is a Switch 1 title. And what's interesting about this is that they're running, yes, the docked mode version of Switch 1 running in handheld mode, and so it looks a lot better than a handheld mode version. So it's just kind of pretty cool that we can see all these games and we can switch that setting on and off so we can see the comparison ourselves pretty quickly. You just press home, you go to the system settings, scroll all the way down to system, go to switch handling, and you just take it on or off, and you can see that jump, that shift. So it's a cool little thing that Nintendo added that we can play around with. Not the kind of thing we've come to expect from Nintendo over the years, but on Switch 2, it's a thing. Now there's something else kind of important I would like to talk about here, and that's the DLSS 5 situation. Nvidia just announced the DLSS 5 improvement. It's still going to be optimized and improved upon, but what Nvidia is saying here is that DLSS 5 infuses pixels with photorealistic lighting and materials to bridge the gap between rendering and reality, and they share this little demonstration here. It does look better in a lot of ways. The lighting does look more realistic, materials do look better. I agree with this. Objectively, that is the case. But where I take issue is we're seeing this AI stuff change how the faces are looking, change a little bit of the artistic direction. Now, I understand that ultimately developers are going to have control over how this impacts their games. Like, I'm sure Capcom is not going to allow this atrocity to grace Ashcroft. And some of you might be confused by me calling it an atrocity. Doesn't she look great there? And yeah, she looks great there. She looks like an Instagram model. But that's not who Grace is. She's not a girl who wears makeup. She's a socially awkward person who's still finding herself in the world. And she's not going to be putting on lipstick when she's going to check out a crime scene on a rainy day. It's almost like an AI beauty filter, basically. And it's kind of generalizing a lot of the characters. Now, let me be clear. For some of the characters here, it looks like a dramatic improvement. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But for a character like Grace, who is a protagonist, an important character, it's taking away from who she is. And so it's concerning to see that Nvidia would share a video out like this and would open things up with Grace as not actually Grace. It's weird. Now, do I think this is actually going to be a problem long term? I don't think so, especially if we are voicing our concerns here and making it clear that we are not okay with this. I'm sure things are going to be improved upon, and most developers are not going to just rely on some sort of weird AI filter to beautify their characters when that's not really needed. In some cases, I'm sure it will be helpful and will ultimately lead to the games looking better, and it's not just about the faces. I understand that. The improvements to lighting and materials that DLSS offers can make for a pretty noticeable improvement. But let's also not allow for generative AI to take away from the artistic direction of the different characters in video games. That would be a terrible thing, which I'm sure most developers will not allow. But what do you all think of the improvements we're seeing in graphics and performance for Switch 2 and this overall DLSS 5 situation? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.